In June of 1986, I was turning 7 years old and my parents were getting divorced. My father's an ex-Navy intelligence officer who worked in the private sector with early computer communications, telecom systems. And he was a tough son of a gun who rode a Harley Davidson with monkey bars back when men were tough. He was not from Missouri, but always said, "I'm from Missouri, you have to show me." He discounted many things, but he never discounted these creatures. That says a lot because he was brilliant on a scientific level. I grew up with him constantly telling me, "You need proof, not just talk." He believed in evidence. My mother was a great artist with tremendous detail and restored everything from Caravaggio's to Da Vinci's. She studied at the Vancouver School of Fine Arts, and right before my 7th birthday, June 8th, 1986, my mother, my younger sister, and I were sitting on a layover in a Chicago airport on our way to Vancouver. My mother gave me a green and white Transformer toy, saying it was an early birthday gift. My mother was divorcing my father, and it was the first time that I was away from him, so I have a very good memory of those times, despite the young age. There's another reason I remember my life at such a young age so well, because that's when I saw one of these half-human, half-apes. In fact, I've relived it every day of my life since. When we got to Vancouver, we stayed in the city with my mother's friend, who we affectionately referred to as our uncle. There was no relationship between him and my mother. He didn't like women, and I'm stating that not because I want this to sound, I don't want it to sound like my mother up and left her family for a new man. They studied art together. They were best friends, back when friendship seemed to mean a lot more. Our uncle grew up in Vancouver, and his parents had a home they shared with their daughter in the countryside, in the mountains outside of British Columbia. We'd get into his white Volkswagen punch buggy and go there on the weekends. Apparently we visited there before the day I saw the creature, but my only recollection of going there was this particular night. After all, I was just a small child. The route to the cabin, a wooden house, was what I distinctly recall my mother stating as being 2.5 hours at a drive. At 55 miles per hour, conservative rate of speed, that's 137.5 miles, a good distance outside of the city, uphill, it seemed. 137 miles is greater than the distance between New York and Philadelphia. Keep that in mind. It is a vast area to cover. We left the city while it was light out, and as we drove, the road became more narrow. For a long portion of the trip, the sky went dark on the account of a thunderstorm. The rain was so heavy that I recall the car's windshield wiper pushing away literally buckets of water at each swipe. The road became a two-lane, two-way path through forest of rocks and trees. We made a turn onto a dirt road big enough to put a truck down, and the sun reappeared, and the storm had ended. We traveled down this path for a little time, maybe 15 minutes, and we turned down a smaller dirt road to the house. The small dirt road was presumably the road of the property, whatever amount of acreage the family owned. My mother told me later in life that the property was massive. The property's single road was straight and big enough to put a pickup truck on. It continued past an open field and cut through the trees surrounding the house. If memory serves me right, it led to a barn. We parked the car next to the house with a straight path in front of it facing down the property road. The house was left on the driver's side door. We exited and walked out to the home's backyard, a large open field about 100 feet wide. It was surrounded by woods. No fence, no chicken wire, just the grass and then the trees. Our hosts and some others were sitting on 2 picnic benches, serving dinner. There was talk of the thunderstorm. We ate and the sky became a dark blue. The sun was setting. The adults were drinking beer in blue cans. Somebody left cookies on the table. My sister and I played by ourselves in the field as the adults went inside. I don't recall any other children being present, just myself and my sister. We came back to the table, and I dared my little sister, younger than me, to drink from one of the beers. She sipped it and said, "Yuck." And then we realized something stunk. It was a horrible smell, like a sewer line. We went to the car and decided to play in the car, play taxi and passenger, like kids sometimes do. The sky was still light enough to contrast everything in sight. As I sat in the driver's seat, I could see straight down the property road and out to the backyard and the tree line buttressing it. The smell returned, and as it did, the tree line behind the backyard began to move. Not a leaf or two, but the entire tops would kind of swish back and forth as something moved through them from left to right of sight. I could make out the brown fur of a large, what appeared to be animal in those trees. As it crossed the property road, it exposed itself as Sasquatch. It looked right into my eyes without stopping its stride. It stared at me for maybe 2 seconds, but what I saw I still remember every day. It crossed a road wide enough to put a truck down with one stride. Here's what I saw. His face was human. I say him because the facial features were square at certain points, and it did not have breasts. It had muscles on its chest. The hair extended around the lips and eyes, but stopped there. It had a flat nose with kind of just 2, open holes in it. It was very flat. The best description I can give of the face is to compare it to the kids in Latin America with the rare disease of having hair all over them that makes them look like the Wolfman, the movie creature. The hair was long and wavy, but flat on the face and ceased around the lips and eyes where it matted more into the skin, and also around the nostrils of the flat nose. The facial skin was tan white. The lips were the same. Its eyes looked into my own. They were defined and human-like. Wide black pupils, white borders. Nothing seemed menacing about the stare. He did not stop his walk. He raised his large hand, and I could see the knuckle ridges and the fingernails. The skin on the hand was black, just like an ape skin, and the fingernails were oval like a human would have, and very large. The hands were truly human. The giant Sasquatch extended its hand and kind of just chopped a tree branch and broke it down, but not with force. It swatted this thick branch like one would swat a mosquito. I did not recall seeing the legs, just the upper body. I'm a former professional athlete, and I've spent my life, more or less, with some of the strongest men in the world. I've never seen such a powerful upper body on a wrestler, football player, power lifter, you name it. The Sasquatch had massive muscles that were clearly defined under mostly brown, thick fur with some spots of black. It was so impressive. Its chest and right side appeared as if a man had the muscles of a horse. The 2 strides it took revealed every muscle of the upper body moving in waves. You could see the muscles move under the thick hair. Thinking about it, as I have for a lifetime, there is no doubt in my mind that this half-human, half-creature could lift over 600 or 700 pounds with ease. The back of the creature had equally well-defined muscles. The arms had great length. It's over 35 years later, and I still get chills remembering the sight. But it was not menacing. It was almost as if it watched us and waited to make its passage away from us, as if it were avoiding contact. This I'm certain. When it passed the road in front of me, I jumped through the open driver's side window and up to the porch stairs to a side door. I was terrified as a child, and that door was locked. The woman inside looked at me from the kitchen and motioned for me to come around the backyard, the back porch of the backyard. I shot around the back of the house, and she opened the door, and I yelled, "I saw a monster," or "I saw a monster man," and they asked if it was a bear, and I replied, no, it was a man, but a monster. I had never heard the word Sasquatch or about the creature. I was only a child. My little sister was there, but I do not know if she understood any of this at that age. We haven't spoken in many years. I've turned my brain inside out on several occasions to recall if my sister immediately left the car with me or how she got back inside the house. No matter how hard I try, I've never been able to recall this part of the chain of events. It must have been adrenaline, the shock of what I saw. The first thing the adults did was bolt lock the door and go to a gun cabinet and pull out some very high caliber rifles. The large kitchen had windows that looked out into the backyard. The homeowners and the others, these people lived up there in those mountains. The oldest, the grandfather, just stared into the backyard, and then somebody said, "Think he saw a Sasquatch?" That was the first time that I heard that word. Now I know what you're thinking. If they knew these creatures, why would they leave children to play alone in the field behind the house? The only answer I can come up with after all these years is that they'd been drinking and probably polished off a case of beers. My mother asked, too, what a Sasquatch was. I remember she had a concerned look on her face, but I do not remember what was discussed. Her arms were crossed. The oldest man in the home, the grandfather, looked out the back window of his house without moving his head, transfixed on the open field that served as a backyard and the woods around it. Then he said, "Let's go take a look." This was the first time that I had ever been around guns. As a kid, it was almost exciting because the monster just walked around the property, and now, so it seemed, adults were taking action. They walked with their guns in a formation that would allow them to cover each other from all sides. I do not know how, but I wound up out there with them. Again, they must have been a few sheets to the wind. They walked out to where the tree line met the field and went to the end where the Sasquatch had begun his march. Somebody said they found bear scat and that it was a bear, but the daughter of the house, who wore a white sweater and was one of the tallest women I ever recall meeting, said, "That's been there for days. This was not a bear." Then we walked to the tree the Sasquatch had chopped the branch down from. The branch was more like a limb. The adults were perplexed and probably scared because that limb was a good 3 inches in diameter. This is when my uncle showed the others that he could not reach the broken branch stem, even when trying to jump to touch it. It now became obvious that the stem was over 8 feet in the air. I watched the Sasquatch raise his hand to his eye level to push and kind of break that branch off of the tree. I can comfortably say, as a man of reasonable common sense, this creature was about 9 feet tall. The height of the broken stem and the diameter of the branch that had popped off the tree worried the adults, who quickly brought all of us back inside. The decision was made that since the daylight had almost closed, it would be best for my mother, my uncle, and us 2 kids to return to the city. The visit had been cut short, rapidly, and with urgency. Before we got into the car, the adults made sure that we were accompanied in their escort. They insisted on leading us through the dirt roads and onto the main road in their pickup truck, accompanied with high-powered rifles and flashlights. When we got to the main road, they bid us good night, and we had a long drive back to Vancouver. In the car, my mother made it a point to tell me I probably saw a bear, but also not to mention it to anybody. When I returned to the East Coast of the United States, I began to spend weekends with my father, who shared an apartment with his best friend, a man I affectionately called Uncle Bob. I remember constantly being in fear that these Sasquatch people were out there somehow in the city, thinking they would just turn a corner at any time. I was a kid, but it was a great fear I had, even in a place like New York. Uncle Bob taught me how to write because he was a writer. One day he took me to the library in our neighborhood, and I described what I had seen over that summer on the way to get some books. He was an ex-Air Force intelligence agent and lived in Oregon for quite some time. He asked the librarian for books on Sasquatch and Bigfoot. It was a great vindication for me to see pictures in a book of the Gymlan film. What I saw was very similar to that. It was almost identical. I know it's not a story about Sasquatch crawling into a tent, and there's no demonic or violent nature to the events that I've described. I'm not being selfish in sharing this, well, maybe a little, but I always wanted to make this public and not for fame. But I guess the thing I want to express the most is how this event changed my life. Every day I've lived, I recall this June evening in 1986. I will say, without giving too much details, that I consider myself accomplished, and I feel accomplished because I think outside the box. And seeing this creature made me understand that things are not as cut and dry as most people would like to believe. Seeing Sasquatch made me look deeper for answers to life's important parts and to verify things for myself. My life is much richer in quality because of that evening in 1986. The Sasquatch was human and did not emit any vibe that it intended to hurt anybody. I do not think I could shoot one of them unless I was under attack. They're just too human. As a sidebar, I returned to Vancouver in the American Pacific Northwest years later. I'd always stop in libraries and pull books out on Sasquatch. I remember a librarian in Vancouver telling me hundreds of people over the years had come in and looked for books about these creatures and claimed to have seen them. That's just about all the proof needed to win a court case anywhere in the world. With hundreds and thousands of sightings, I think that all raises a level of evidence above the prima facie standard that would make for a factual finding in just about any court in the civilized world that these creatures exist. Nevertheless, that's my story, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you'll share some of your stories here as well, and it's been my pleasure. I hope you liked hearing this story, and I look forward to hearing your comments and inquiries about it down below. Thank you.